Hello everybody, and welcome to The Red Route. This is a Zendikar Rising story that is separate from the main storyline, so this is not Chapter 2 of Zendikar Rising. This is its own story, and it's part 1 of a two-parter by Miguel Lopez. So let's go ahead and dive into The Red Route, part of the Zendikar Rising storyline. In Tazim's deep Umara River Gorge, a lone pair flew by hook and line. The two, a battle-worn core and a tall, lithe merfolk, were only ever still in the moments between swings. For those weightless heartbeats, it appeared as if the whole world moved around them. On Zendikar, this was possible. The two had traveled for the better part of as many days from their last rest. The Magosi Portage itself some days up from the far banks of the Halimar, across which, their home, Seagate stood against the raging ocean. They chased rumors of a fallen hedron, an artifact of a world long gone. This flight, the swing and leap in defiance of natural rules, fed one worry and hid the other. When a moment of inattention could send you tumbling to a raging water below, Esoterica was pushed to the side. Akiri's lead hook bit the well-worn anchor. The line tensed through her swing, and she fell with the confidence of someone who knew they would never land. At the nadir of her swing, the whole world was a rush of sound and color. The roaring river, white and emerald below her, the stratified crimson and umber walls of the gorge blurring to either side, the hum of her core line as it sliced the air. Flying, for Akiri, was simply a matter of holding on. Akiri and her companion Zareth traveled up the Umara River Gorge, a long, stable, well-textured valley carved over millennia by the Umara River. With sheer walls plunging hundreds of feet from rim to river, the gorge bristled with natural and artificial anchor points, the best of them painted in bright colors for line swingers eager to make good time. A stiff wind raced down from the gorge's heights, perfect for downstream navigation, if one wanted to take the fast route to Halimar Bay. It was a canyon of flight, one of the few stable places in all of Zendikar. To a master like Akiri, traveling the gorge was as easy as walking. Akiri pulled through her swing, using her momentum to propel herself forward and up. A flick of the wrist, and she was free, soaring. A weightless moment between the flight and fall, critical for rest, to catch one's breath. Akiri did both, sighted her next anchor, and threw her following hook as she started to fall. A small thing. A moment unwelcome. Fear, the old friend, always there. Should the hook miss? Impossible. Or the earth break? Quite possible, but unlikely given that the rock was composed the gorge. Then Akiri would not fly. She would fall. And that would be the end of her. Another core swallowed by the Umara. Another core who forgot what Zendikar thought of them now. Even those born to walk tripped once in a while. Akiri's following hook caught, bit, and held. She felt the impact resonate through her line, through her arm, and into her heart, and she swung up from the earth without fear. On the swing, she would not falter. She would fly. Shouting behind her reminded Akiri that not everyone was so meditative in their practice. Zareth, her old friend and companion, whooped and hollered each time he flew in apex, cheered when his lead or follow hook caught an anchor, and egged her on. "Akiri!" Zareth shouted behind. "Go red! Red route!" Red route was a difficult, quick hook route up the Umara River Gorge. Akiri knew it well. She'd set the route herself during the battle, scouting and building the red for her company of skilled line slingers. Back then, it was to outpace hungering beasts in the Eldrazi broodlings that stalked the high places of the gorge. Now, line slingers ran the red to settle bets and show off. A change for the better. A few momentum-building swings and she was ready. At the apex of her next swing, she held her throw, twisting in the air to look back at Zareth, her white hair whipping around her face. Flying behind her, Zareth still looked like the lanky merfolk Filch that tried to steal her hooks all those years ago. Only now, with a bit more age to his scale, and his own set of hooks. Youth, though it quit most, never really left him. Follow! Akiri shouted to her old friend. She fell, twisting and flung both hooks out before her. Red Route had anchors on both sides, and she would need the strength of both of her arms to make the next set. She trusted Zareth to match her movements, if not her pace. The fear was always there, but the freedom! Akiri and Zareth's happy shouts echoed up the Umara River Gorge. Ahead, there was danger. That was a given across Zendikar, and especially so considering that they had been dispatched by a sea gate to follow up on rumors of a fallen Hedron. But for now, that seemed very far off. Together, Akiri and Zareth flew. Later that evening, Akiri and Zareth made camp atop the high rim of the gorge. The hazy, burnt-orange sun spread like a cooked yolk across the horizon, and the sound of the Umara far below was a gentle, constant roar. The plains atop the gorge stretched to the horizon, split only by a jagged spear-blade mountains rising in the distant north, where the plains gave way to low foothalls and, eventually, the bruised darkness of the bulwark. Mountain roots hovered across the horizon, as if one had taken a double handful of rocks and sand and threw them into the air and froze the silicate rain and fall. That, Akiri thought, is likely not far from the truth. Akiri sat against the wall of a small, wind-swept tree and spread slinger's paste over her tired arms. Zareth stood a way off, watching the sunset. Before the sinking orb, he was a dark silhouette, his shadow long and deeply defined. To be on mission once more with Zareth had shaken her in ways she had not expected. His recent return to Seagate was welcome, but carried with it heavy reminders of what had been done not only to Tazim, but to all of Zendikar. Reminders of those who had committed the act, people who could dance between worlds, dip their brilliant light into them for a moment, and then move on with ruin in their wake. The sun sank, and the day cold. Akiri recalled the chill in the Seagate under Ulamog, in the shadow of the beast free of its ancient chains. Akiri shivered. How long had that thing been jailed under the earth, and what had its jailing done to the world to make it into a prison? And who made her world the World Eater's prison? An overwhelming burst of anger, barely contained. This is why, she thought. Seagate, and the climb to Marasa. This is why you're doing this. Remember? A life of reminders was as exhausting as the Umara Red Route. Akiri exhaled the tension. Better to breathe. To note that it was a nice evening, if humid. The sky was clear, but for a Hedron shards of Emeria, one low enough that its trailing waterfall veil was visible, a sparkling lace, springing endless, spilling into the open air. A patch of green growth huddled beneath, an oasis in the grass. Birds drifted around its bulk, alighting with piercing cries, only just audible under a churning Umara. Zendikar, the prison. Zendikar, the ruin. Zendikar, the wounded world, still could be beautiful. Akiri, Zareth called to her. The thing we're chasing after. The Hedron? Why do you think it fell? If I had to guess, Akiri looked up toward the sky, toward Emeria, it simply fell. Zareth grunted. He followed Akiri's gaze. Nothing that ordered would fall without a reason. That's true, Akiri said. The scholars back at Seagate quibbled over the nature of the Hedrons and the mechanisms by which they remained suspended in the air. They sat with telescopes and mapped their minor oscillations and movements, hired expeditions, some that Akiri had even led, to charted courses by which one might ascend into Emeria, and argued over naming of layers and sky marks. But did they know why they remained in place or why they fell? No. No more than they knew what their function was or who made them. Akiri was not afflicted with these scholarly fears. The library and study halls of the Seagate were useful to her only in that they had food and drink freely available for the rangers, line-slingers, and adventurers of the expeditionary house. Did she wonder? Yes, of course she did. Did she fear? No more than one would fear a sudden death. Yes and no. That hypothesis would put you in vaunted company, Zareth, Akiri said. She stood and tossed Zareth her pouch of slinger's paste. He caught it. When you come back to the gate, I can introduce you to some scholars who study the Hedrons, Akiri said. They'll surely have some good books on the subject. Good resale value. Akiri spoke with mirth and gently. Zareth laughed. Hey now, he said. Allegedly. Akiri believed him, that Zareth fled years ago. The one who returned to Seagate in its expeditionary house now is a different person, in a different time. Well, she hoped. Over a traveling dinner, a thick stew of harvested wild onions, chopped tubers, smoked meat, and sprigs of herbs found nearby, Akiri and Zareth recovered from the day. You were good up the red route, Akiri said to Zareth as he stirred the low-boiling stew. But you need to work on your follow-hook disengagement. We'll take the green route tomorrow, so you can practice. Zareth nodded. He tasted the stew, then sprinkled some more salt into the broth. It's my shoulder. Broke it in a fall learning how to sling. He rolled his shoulder, a movement that Akiri could tell was genuinely limited, if exaggerated to prove a point. Otherwise, I'd take the title for fastest up the red, Zareth said with a smile. Akiri thought not, but didn't say. Instead, she pointed to the hooks attached to his harness. Those don't look like normal hooks. Where did you pick those up? They're skyclave, from the corps that run the trenches in Ondu, Zareth said. He reached over to his harness and unclipped one from its line. Brave line-slingers found them in the ruins, he said, tossing the hook to Akiri. That's the only place you can find them. You have to be brave, or dear to someone who is. Akiri examined the hook, turning it over. It was covered in a fine and regular etching, a geometric pattern that looked to Akiri like a winding, spiraling labyrinth. Angles and corners, diamonds and perfect squares. Not natural, but not of any make that she recognized, save for what it could not be. Did you find this one? Akiri asked. No, Zareth said. I was dear to someone brave. A sad smile crossed his face. Anyway, they'll never let you down, Zareth said. And yet, Akiri said, raising an eyebrow, my shoulder, I know. Don't believe everything anyone says, right? Zareth's clever smile. Akiri knew it well. Mirth lurked around every corner, likely how he fell. It's beautiful, she said, passing the hook back to Zareth. The pattern carved into it? Just like those on a Hedron's face, Zareth nodded. I saw many of them in Ondu, a land bound at one, even. He turned the hook over, and a small smile crossed his face. Here, he said, offering Akiri the hook. You take it. I have others. Thank you, Zareth, Akiri said, taking the hook. She reached over to her pack, pulled her main line, and secured the skyclave hook to it. She did not need to ask Zareth where his supply came from. In fact, she thought, I might be better off not knowing. She stowed the hook in her pack and returned to her seat with a waxed canvas case from which she pulled a map. Akiri rolled the map out on the dry ground and pinned its corners with some nearby stones. Zareth ladled out their dinner and sat opposite the map. Tomorrow or the day after? He asked. Tomorrow, Akiri said. It's only 6 miles to this waterfall, she said, pointing to a marked but unnamed fall on the map. The Hedron should be at its source. Do we need to worry about them? Zareth asked. For a moment, Akiri was confused, but then the skinless titan, eclipsing the sun. Waterfalls of ocean water spill from its looming form. It spreads its arm as wide as the horizon, and the sea gate shakes and shimmers with heat. She knew. No, Akiri said, they're gone from this world. We won. Her throat was dry as dust, even now, at the thought of them. Zareth ate, regarding the map, but not really looking at it, Akiri noticed, looking through it. She knew that look, that faraway way that caught those who had seen things no one should, nighttime stained, orange with fire, the stink of quick-rotting dead and the screams of the living. Her sword heavy and slick with steaming blood. The Eldrazi killed with a touch, some with their mere presence. Comrades crumbled to white ash, choking the air as she struggled to breathe. The first rush of the brood beasts nearly overwhelmed them, but somehow they held, and the air sizzled with energy, and the next wave crashed into them. She remembered how the inexperienced Zareth had been during the battle. He had pressed into the liberation of Seagate because he could not hold a spear, assigned to a unit because so many had been killed. He was tall for his age then, and the other conscripts thought him older, more experienced. She'd only been a handful of years older than Zareth when the Eldrazi burst upon their world. A corps who thought herself invincible because she had learned to fly as her ancestors did, with a hook and a line, and Zendikar itself as her wide-open playground. She was quick with a sword, an adept warrior in a band of champions. Even then, her skill and grace had won her acclaim across Zendikar, and had given to her a sense of being beyond herself. With her kin and loves by her side, she did not fear when she first heard the news of the Titans bursting from the earth. What were they but another chance to cover herself in glory? She and her band would join forces of the living, fly triumphant in the face of these things others called God, and save the world, she had thought. "Akiri," Zareth said, breaking her reverie. "I'm sorry to have left you the way I did." He spoke softly, a whisper Akiri did not know him able to voice. "I couldn't take the quiet. I thought that I would be free if it all went away, if I went far away from Seagate, and Kaza, and Aura, away from all of it." The small muscles of his jaw pulsed as he spoke through old pain. "Away from you." The sound of the ocean, never still. The rough gutter fights of human, core, and merfolk against dust-making Eldrazi drones and lesser spawn. Above, the crack and flash of Walker's magic blasting apart more terrifying beasts. She could be mad at him. Akiri could have raged at him for how he left, and for the things he stole. For how much Kaza had wept for him. Aura certainly cursed Zareth for his flight, and threatened to kill the boy if he returned. But that was Aura being Aura, and Akiri knew he was only dramatic in his anger. It hid his love, and his fear. She could be mad at him in her young own life. Akiri learned hard the cost of leaving without saying goodbye, but she also had come to recognize what a gift it was to be able to forgive. On Zendikar, their wounded little world, healing was not done passively. It was a practice. Whether remaking the world or mending the self, healing was work. Same with forgiveness. "Zareth," she said, "I'm happy to have you back." Zareth looked up from his work. For the first time since he was swaggered back into Seagate days ago, she saw the Zareth she knew. "I've never had a place to come back to," Zareth said. "It's nice. Feels like things might be getting better. Being back at Seagate showed me that we did something more than survive." "We do more than survive," Akiri said. "We save the world. Now, we bring power to its people, and then we live." Zareth smiled, small. Some time passed in quiet before the two of them returned to their meal. Together, they sat under the tree atop the Umara River Gorge, and the waning light of the sun slipped below the distant horizon, and they talked about nothing important at all. The next day, they reached the site of the fallen Hedron. The waterfall, reported to have dried up, spilled at a steady course. "Well," Zareth said, between breaths, bent double over his knees, "there's nothing here." He stood and looked around the small summit of the spire they had ascended. Bowl-shaped, the amphitheater summit cradled a pond sprung from no visible source, which fed a shallow stream that spilled out above the gorge below. The summit was shrouded in mist, and the day's light was overpowering in the high air. Little vegetation grew save for patchy, twisted grass. It was less an oasis than an excerpt, a slice of land that appeared utterly out of place for the place that it was. "Hey, Akiri!" he shouted. "Where's the big rock?" Akiri stood a little way off, toward the edge of the pool that fed the waterfall they had spent the better part of the day ascending. Save for the white chalk on her hands and forearms, one could not tell she had just led and set a day's climb. A frown furrowed her face. Hands on her hip, she looked around just to be sure. Some spell, perhaps? Or lingering effect of the roil that hid the Hedron from their sight? The pool that fed the waterfall was a chromatic beauty, and it was the only feature of note atop this bare summit. Mineraled in brilliant reds, blues, greens, and yellows, the crystal-clear water was still as a held breath. It didn't take any deep investigation to see that Zareth was right. "It's not a rock, it's an artifact," Akiri called back. 3 days of hard travel, line-slinging, and this final climb to find nothing. Not even a big rock. "It's a pretty pond, at least," Zareth said. Akiri grunted. "It was a pretty pond. Don't drink from it," she said. "Poisoned? That's possible." Akiri scuffed a small stone from the bank into the pond. It skipped into the water, then vanished. More likely to be magic, she said. Maybe that's what happened to the Hedron. Absolutely possible. They stood and let the wind fill the silence. It whistled, lonely. What now? Zareth asked. Akiri looked back to Zareth, then past him. The whole of Tazim spread out, hazy through the golden mist of wind-whipped fall. Hidden beyond vision was her answer. We go back to the sea gate, Akiri said. No beacon could be seen this far out, but one could imagine it in the city beneath. Shining, distant, but full of promise. A glittering city at the mouth of Halimar Bay. We still have work to do, Akiri said. Back there. Up there. Zareth peered with her, looking for the easterly horizon. In the meantime, it's a nice view, he said. Not all bad, even if the work is not done. Akiri gave him a soft smile. Come on then, Zareth. Let's go home. Though distant from Seagate, and no more grand than a single long hall and some outbuildings, the Magosi Portage was a beacon of civilization this far into the interior. Atop the mighty Magosi waterfall, the portage was the major rest stop for travelers and traders taking the safe route up or down the Umara, and a common base camp and way station for explorers. Constant about the portage was the low rumble of the Magosi itself. The tallest waterfall along the gorge, the Magosi Falls, formed where the Umara River took a single sheer step 300 feet down. Some ancient geologic trauma rent the world here, lifting one section of it up and tearing another down. Impassable for centuries, surveyors out of the sea gate had carved a series of switchbacks into the wall after the city's liberation. Vertiginous, it nonetheless allowed travelers to make a relatively safe ascent from the lower gorge to the upper. The Magosi Falls echoed the story of Zendikar. Something old had done something terrible to the world. Some people died, most lived, nothing changed, and Zendikar continued its shuddering and shaking, riddled with planar fever. Then, the world and its people adapted. Akiri and Zareth, for the first time in days, spent an evening seated about a table on sturdy chairs, eating food that had been served to them, that they had paid for with coin and credit from trade goods they'd brought back from their expedition. They even had cold drinks and listened to music played by a valiant group of merfolk trying to overcome the low and constant roar of the Magosi waterfall. Dozens of Kor, merfolk, and humans milled about the portage's main hall, eating and conversing, haggling over small goods and swapping news and rumors they'd accrued on their travels. Outside, the stamp and call of docile pack beasts, hireable for the trek to the next portage, climbed many miles away, carried in on the wind with their heady fragrance. Civilization, Zareth said, finishing his cup. He scrunched on some ice and rubbed at the back of his neck with his hands. I think I'll take another one of these, he said, rattling his cup, and then go for another wash. I forgot how nice hot water is on these scales. Zareth grabbed up their shared purse and tugged at the drawstring to open it. Akiri, finishing her food, nodded toward the pouch. You'll have to use your coin hunting to find anything in there, she said. We spent the last of this on the meal, and the supplies we need to get back. Akiri cocked an eyebrow and looked to Zareth's pack, which rested on the large table next to her own gear. Last of what I know that held, in any case. Hey, you won't let me lighten any pockets here, Zareth said. We're representatives of Seagate, Zareth. We're not hungry conscripts anymore. Right. We are thirsty members of Seagate, Akiri, Zareth said. The scholars get their maintenance taxes. I don't see a difference in us getting our share. The scholars earn those taxes through their work, Akiri said, as she busied herself with clearing her kit from the table. Same as we earn ours. Now, to that point, Akiri reached into her main pack and fished out a small purse, which she tossed on the table before Zareth. It landed with a heavy thud and a sound of gold. You didn't, Zareth laughed. He grabbed the purse, opened it, and pawed through, pulling out a coin. I found us work. Pays half now and half at the end, Akiri said. A caravan bound for Coralheim. Set to depart tomorrow. At least that's on the way, Zareth said. He plucked a few more coins from the purse, tied it, and stood. Early morning departure? Would it be any other way? Zareth laughed. Fine then. I'm off to find another drink. He stood. Zareth, Akiri said, stopping him. She upended the coin purse and pebbles spilled from it. Zareth laughed and held his hands up. "You caught me," he said. "Let me get your round, then." "And some of those dumplings," Akiri said. "The ones with sauce on them." Zareth left and returned with drinks and food. He sat, passed her chair across the table, and the two of them set to eating. Later that evening, as night had truly fallen and the crowd had gotten larger, Akiri and Zareth sat out on the portage's cliffside deck, finishing one last round of salted fried foods and cool drinks. They had spent some good time catching up, and maybe it was the cool drinks or the casual atmosphere after so long on the road, but in the course of otherwise light conversation, Zareth asked Akiri a question that would mark this moment as the night's coda. "When we return to Seagate," Zareth said, "you plan to volunteer us for some secret mission. An expedition into one of the Skyclaves." Zareth leaned back in his chair. "And that's why we were out here following up on that Hedron, right?" Akiri didn't deny it. "Marasa," she said. "Seagate thought that we might find something useful from a freshly fallen Hedron, but that assumed that there was a Hedron there to find." "What is there to find on Marasa?" Zareth asked. "Those Skyclaves are all old and dead." "I don't know," Akiri said. "Our patron is willing to spend good coin on a bet that something waits up there. Something powerful." "Who is this, Akiri?" Zareth asked. "Willing to stake her dream for a better world on a hunch?" Akiri nodded. "The money is good," she said. "No one spends that amount of coin on a hunch. It's a bet. A bet that what we may find in Marasa could help us fix our world." "I know it's my pattern, but," Zareth leaned in, lowering his voice, "we could leave in the night and head for some other land, you and I together. With your skill and my charm, we wouldn't want for anything." Akiri shook her head. "This is our world, all of its agonies and sickness. Fixing what has to be done to her is our struggle, our charge, our place," Akiri said. "We can't leave." "We might not return," Zareth countered. "Yes," Akiri said. "We have the same fight as any. Bloom after a long winter. 100 of us might wither in the late cold, or be cut by a jealous gardener, but there are too many for spring not to come. We have to try, no matter the cost." "And if we find nothing?" Akiri sipped her drink. "Hope, at least. I suppose you can bring that back," Zareth suggested. "Give people something to dream about." "Hope? No," Akiri said, not unkind but firm. "People cannot make a fervent blade from hope, or shape that feeling into a tender knife." Akiri shook her head. "I don't want to give people hope. I want to create a power for our people. Find a way to give our people, all of Zendikar's people, the means by which they might shape a weapon from their pain and use it to heal the world for good," she said. Zareth leaned back from his conspiratorial hunch. Akiri was rigid. Serious. "Look, I think I've had enough," Akiri said, breaking the rigidity that gripped her. She indicated the empty plates and mugs. "I'm going to bed. I'll see you tomorrow?" "I'll be there," Akiri, Zareth said. Quiet. "Will you?" "You asked me to be there," Zareth said, "so I'll be there." Akiri regarded Zareth for a moment. A long moment. Zareth did not see Akiri the fearless voyager, decorated veteran and storied line-slinger, but Akiri unnamed, the young corps officer who pulled him through the darkness at Seagate, her gray skin caked in the flat ash of their dead friends and a decayed landscape. Her eyes, lit by firelight, blank with terror, but still pulling her forward. Akiri who pressed a dead man's spear into his hand and told him that he needed to fight the things that killed the world with a touch. Otherwise, no one would be left alive when the battle was done. "I'll be there, Aki," Zareth said again. "Good," Akiri said. "Good," she repeated quietly as she left. The night dragged on long, and Zareth spent none of it asleep. And that is the first side story for Zendikar Rising. Thank you to everybody who joined me for the live reading here at twitch.tv/Amazonian. This will also be on YouTube, hopefully within the next few hours. I have to edit it and get it up there, but thank you all so much for listening. I will be recording the next story when it gets released on next Wednesday. That's going to be part of the main storyline for Zendikar Rising, and then on next Friday is going to be the second part of this story. I'll see you then.